Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CSM. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to introduce and to welcome back our next guest and our keynote speaker, Lieutenant Rebecca Shaw, U.S. Navy Test Pilot and Project Officer, Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 20. Lieutenant Rebecca Shaw attended the U.S. Naval Academy, commissioning with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering in 2009, about 10 years ago. Before this, we were talking for a few minutes, and I told her that my husband was also a Naval Academy graduate, but he graduated at a time where women were not permitted to go into the Naval Academy. So we talked about the changes that have occurred, especially in the last 10 years, in the Navy and in the government, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that. Her background is astounding and inspiring. Following commissioning, she attended flight training at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma and at the Corpus Christi, Texas Naval Air Station, earning her wings of gold in April 2011. She attended P-3C Fleet Replacement Squadron training with Patrol Squadron VP-30 in Jacksonville. In February 2012, she reported for her first operational flying tour with the world-famous Golden Eagles of Patrol Squadron VP-9. While attached to VP-9, Lieutenant Shaw deployed to Italy, Greece, and Spain. I hope you got a little bit of downtime there. And conducted detached operations in Iceland and Scotland, supporting naval operations in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and North Atlantic, to include Operation Nimble Warning. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. In spring 2015, Lieutenant Shaw was selected to attend U.S. Naval Test Pilot School as a member of class of 149 and graduated in June 2016. In fall of 2018, she graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a Master of Science degree in Space Systems Engineering. Lieutenant Shaw has over 1,600 hours of flight time and has flown a combination of 20 models of jet, propeller, and rotary wing aircraft. Her awards include the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, twice, and the Meritorious Unit Commendation, as well as the National Service Defense Medal. Please join me and give her a warm welcome to Lieutenant Rebecca Shaw.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me this morning. I think this is the second time in my life I've been in a room this size with more women than men, so that's pretty awesome. I was really excited about the theme. I know we mentioned earlier that where you guys were kind of going with this. I'm at the mid-career point. I'm 10 years in the Navy, and maybe some of you are mid-career point or have been at this point. It's like, what do the next 10 years look like? What do I need to do to end up either in the front office or in the C-suite or any management position? Where is that going? And so sustaining the momentum really is how I think that we get there, and some of the challenges that I've heard leaders describe in getting people there as well. 2 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, I was the keynote speaker for a Girls in STEM event. Let me see where. And I'm not sure if they asked me back because my jokes were hilarious or because of my biography, but based on that response, it sounds like it was my biography. All right, so I was probably asked back here for the things that they read in my biography. But when I look at my biography, I'm like, okay, this is 10 years of work. These are all of my professional achievements as an adult, and it's one page. And if you really look at it, my picture's about half of it. So I'm wondering, what's really missing here? What does the next 10 years look like? And probably for the next 10 years as a professional, I'm thinking, I need to use a bigger font or I need to live my life double-spaced. I'm not really sure. But the things that are probably missing that are omitted are the really important lessons that I've learned up to this point about, taking risk, whether inside my career or in other phases of my life, being authentic, developing confidence, and then this other phrase that I'm starting to hear a lot, which is self-care, which is funny because for the first 10 years, nobody in the Navy was talking about self-care, but apparently that's a thing now. I think the part that's omitted that doesn't really show how I achieve these things is that the only name in my bio is mine. It doesn't show all the people that took me from the person in this photo, yeah, that's a good one, to the person that's standing here in front of you today, and not to even include the person who now does my hair and the people who did my eye surgery. So mentorship is really the reason that I'm here, and there's a great speaker that's going to be after me that's going to kind of go into some of your own techniques for developing mentorship, but I couldn't be here and I couldn't have accomplished those things in my bio without mentorship. So I decided to go with mentorship in me, and I'm happy because I've already met 5 people with doctorates, so I do not want to give you the dictionary definition of mentorship or statistics because a lot of people here in the room are very well educated. So these are some of the big takeaways in mentorship. Instead of giving you the definition, I'm just going to kind of go through some of the examples in my life that have really driven home why mentorship is important and why I think it's going to help me sustain the momentum for the next decade. So mentorship is a relationship. And these were my first mentors. This is my family. They were issued to me at birth. And as parents, they were mentors because they were invested in my development. They set standards. They expected me to meet the standards and the guidelines that they had laid out for me. And also, even when I failed, they really cared about just like my development in general. And that's why mentorship is a relationship. So going through here, for me, my father, he taught me the value of hard work, and he instilled that when when I was working on my calculus homework, or he was helping me improve my running, and also taught me the value of humor and sarcasm. While it hasn't always served me well in the Navy, it's helped me when people have said things like, why would you major in engineering? You should have gotten a degree in cooking. And I'm like, well, I'm already super good at cooking, so I got to take your job. My mom, she was very dedicated to the community and service, and she really instilled those values for us. She also wouldn't just give us the answers, which is I think was really important as a mentor. She gave us the tools to be go look it up. The version of Google and Wikipedia was the original Encyclopedia Britannicas, and I would probably get just as much lost going down through those as I do on the internet now. That little guy that's right next to me is my twin brother, who's adorable in this photo. I would have never said that when we were growing up. But he's really my favorite mentor. He's wise beyond his years. He has a lot of integrity, and he loves the Navy. So he had actually convinced me to join the Navy. He thought it would be a worthy endeavor and also believed that I could do it and I would enjoy it. And that camaraderie, that brotherly relationship, I actually enjoyed throughout the Navy with my peers, which was a great sort of predecessor for that. So those were my first mentors. And so everyone in this room has an opportunity to mentor either as a parent, or you've had mentors who are parents or family members or an older sibling or aunt and uncle. But can I see a show of hands of anyone here who has ever been a leader, whether it's one person or of a big group or multiple people? Just go ahead, put it up. It's kind of early. All right, so if you see those people, make sure after this you go and ask them for a job. That's networking. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you've ever been a mentor. Awesome. So are they different? And I would say yes. One of my mentors actually taught me this. He, and was the reason I believe it. He had said there's a difference between leadership and mentorship, and it really has to do with the role of the mentee. As a leader, as pretty much everyone in this room knows, you have to lead everybody. You have to be invested in getting everybody to a certain level to meet the mission and for the good of the group that you're leading. But as a mentor, it's really a two-way street. The mentee has to see something in you that responds to them, whether it's your leadership style or who you are or something that resonates where they're like, I want to be that person. And so you can't mentor everybody. You can try, but it just might not be a good match, and that's okay. It's the same thing I tell my friends who are dating online. It's just not a good match. There's somebody else out there for you. And so mentees seek out people for different reasons. So my first professional mentor was a professor I had at the Naval Academy. She was my weapons systems instructor, and she was awesome. I just remember seeing her, standing up there in her uniform. She was a pilot, which I knew at the time I wanted to be. She was smart, she was polished, she had a family, she just was a great teacher, and I took the initiative I really enjoyed her class, I did well in her class, and I asked questions about her career and how she made those decisions for her career, and so I took an active role. And when it comes down to that networking piece, which we talked about earlier, she shared her network with me. So when it was time for me to go to summer training, there wasn't really an aviation spot that I was excited about, and she had been a test pilot, which at the time I didn't really know what test pilots were. I had never seen the right stuff, so there's no way of knowing. And she used her network and helped me, she didn't do it for me, put together no-cost TDY orders to come down to Pax River. And when I came down here, I was hooked. I saw all the different aircraft, all the engineering test pilots, how much they knew about their planes. I thought test pilots are the best pilots in the world. And now that I am one, I can tell you it's absolutely true. But that set me on this path. Like her opening up that network to me, her being my mentor, like just seeing that was really important. But the example I just gave you was a woman. And mentoring women is not just a woman's responsibility. We are not going to get to that next step with just saying, hey, if you're a woman leader, you got to mentor all the women in the room. Women need to mentor men. Men need to mentor women. We need to get rid of this idea that if there's one woman in the room, it's her job to somehow bring every other woman behind her up. It is, but it's got to be a group effort. And in the military, most of my mentors were actually men, just from, them being awesome, but also just like a numbers game, right? So most of my leaders were men. When I was on that tour in Hawaii, which just sounded great from the way she described it, from all the deployments that I had a string of fantastic department heads, the middle managers, and they were incredible. I would have never told them that because I was a junior officer at the time, and there was just kind of this rivalry. But my department heads were all great for different reasons. They were all great leaders, and my commanding officers were all really great. I was really fortunate. It seemed like the command screen board and the department head screen boards really knew what they were doing at the time. But I guess we'll find out in a couple weeks since I'm up for department head. So it's just phenomenal when somebody trusts you at an early age to say, hey, I think you could do my job. Or when a skipper looks at you, your commanding officer, your boss looks at you and say, you remind me of myself. Because I wasn't thinking, oh, well, that's weird because, like, you're a man. I was thinking, oh, that's awesome. Like, he's a skipper, and I remind him of himself when he was at this point. That must mean that I can be a skipper. And that's all they had to say. That's all they had to say in my performance evaluations, like, hey, you remind me of me. And another example, Commander Pat Gegg was one of my department heads at the time. And this was a guy who took all the right jobs, right? Like, he was like on the path to command, and now he's made command. But the reason that his leadership style resonated with me had nothing to do with the way he looked, had nothing to do with the jobs he had taken. It was really because he was a very hard worker, he had a very high standard, and he had a lot of empathy. And I was like, those are my values. Like, I looked at that leader, I said, those are my values. And he took mentorship really seriously. He still does. Him and all of my former commanding officers, I could call them right now and say, I don't know what I'm gonna do, and they would help me out with whatever it was and help guide me to the path I needed to be on. And I'm so grateful for that because they set me up for what my goal was to be a test pilot. I also had a female commanding officer who was phenomenal, just like the other skippers I had. And I point that out because even though anyone can be a mentor, I do think it's important to see yourself. So I hope I'm not contradicting myself. I'm talking about two different things. I think it's important to see someone who looks like you in leadership positions, even though that's not an exclusive quality for a mentor. So I hope I made a good point with that. So mentoring is not only women's leader responsibility, it's not only our job to mentor women, And mentorship can also be extremely impactful. It's not just for, networking is important, getting you to that next step is important when you're at your best, but mentorship can change your life when you really need it. When I started out in flight school, when I'm first learning to fly an aircraft, I struggled a little bit. This is the photo of someone who's struggling. There's a lot of sweat, confusion. I've probably just been yelled at for 2 hours straight in an aircraft. And you think when you take the helmet off, it's going to be this really cool shot, but this was it. This is what I looked like when I was struggling. And this ensign, she really needed a mentor. And so I was struggling. I couldn't progress to the next phase in flight. And my commander at the time, my commanding officer, was Captain Bailey. I had never met him before when I went in for this track ride. And he was like, all right, laid out what the standard was going to be. What do you expect to see? He's like, do you think that this is going to go well? I was like, yeah, this is going to go great. And we went out for the flight, and it did not go great. There were some significant highs, and there were also some lows, and it had nothing to do with the fact that we were in an aircraft. We finished the flight, and it's like, if any of you have ever bombed something, you know that feeling when you're walking away. You're like, that was not good. It was just such an awkward silence. And he said, how do you think it went? Which is such a loaded question. It's like we were both in the same airplane. Like, we know how that went. But I relied back on what the father had taught me. My father had taught me about, humor and sarcasm. And I said, well, I'm close. And I don't know if it was, the resilience or just the fact that he was like, all right, he's like, you know what, I agree, you're close. But I can't authorize any more flights. It has to go to a general. And I was in an Air Force base at the time, so I was like, okay. He said, now I want you to keep working hard and stay in the books. Okay, that's what you need to do in order to get through this next phase. I was like, all right, that seems doable. So for 2 months, while I waited to see the general, I showed up every day. I would get in the simulator, I would practice, I studied. When my classmates were getting ready for their flights, I would print off the paperwork and help them get ready for their flights. And I did what he said. And when the few of us went in front of the general and we needed 2 remediation flights to get back in the syllabus, he gave it to all of us. He says, you 2 flights, see if you can make it happen. And because I had taken the captain's advice and I had worked very hard and stayed in the books, those 2 flights went by fine. And I got back in the syllabus and I did well. I was able to go P3s in Hawaii. It all really worked out. But I really needed him to be that leader in that moment, to be that mentor. 6 months later, I finished flight school and I got my wings, and I sent him an email, because you can find anybody on the Global. And I said, hey, sir, I just wanted to say thank you. Gratitude's a really important thing with mentorship. I said, thank you. I did it because, you gave me a chance, and thank you for that. And he said, that's great. Work hard, stay in the books. Like, we need competent, good aviators. It was never me. I knew you could do it. But just keep working hard. I said, okay. And then 4 years later, I got into test pilot school, which was always my goal. It's pretty competitive. Some people apply a lot and never get in. And that was it for me. Like, that, it was fantastic. And as luck would have it, for pre-arrival training for test pilot school, he happened to be the commanding officer of the base that I was flying at. And so I remember seeing him, and I was like, oh my God. I went up, I was like, sir, do you remember Ensign Shaw? He's like, of course. And I told him, I said, I'm here because I'm getting ready for test pilot school. And he was just like, wow. And that moment that I was afforded is one of the most special moments to me for the rest of my life, because I was able to look at somebody who gave me a chance and tell them that I took that chance and I made something with it. And that is it was so impactful. Years later, I can hardly talk about it. That's really the value of having a mentor, or being a mentor and giving that moment to somebody. So a mentor can be extremely impactful. And then finally, go outside your normal professional circle. And I think everyone's really set up for that here. 2 years ago, when I was working on my master's, I went to the Space Symposium out in Colorado Springs, And any of you who work in the space industry, if you haven't been to it, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic event. But I went with a few colleagues of mine from the Navy, and I was there working on some research for Hopkins, and I was able to meet 2 individuals who work in the space industry. Neither of them were military affiliated. One worked at Hopkins and the other worked at NASA. And the 2 of them became my space mentors. They completely opened up their network. I told them the research project I was working on for school, and they introduced me to the people at NASA who had designed the equipment that I was looking at. They would do absolutely anything. And what it also provided was that I now have mentors that I'm able to bounce ideas off of that are outside of the Navy. And while being in the Navy, we have this like rigid structure, but there's a lot of resources there. Obviously, all of my other mentors were in the Navy. They're able to kind of provide insight for like the normal Navy progression. My mentors outside the Navy have a different view. It's more diverse, and I'm able to get a better, well-rounded input on decisions that I need to make. And so that sort of diversity of thought, I find it really valuable, and that's why I recommend going outside of your professional circle. Don't ever be afraid to cold call somebody, either whether it's through LinkedIn or just from another avenue, because if they don't answer, it shows more about them than it does about you. But I've had a lot of positive feedback doing that. And it also helped me realize that I have biases. So in the last 4 or 5 years, I thought that the people that I would be mentoring would be young women who are interested in aviation. That seemed pretty straightforward. That's who I thought I would, end up leading, through, my experiences. But what surprised me is I was a guest on this podcast, and the people who reached out to me afterwards for mentorship were young civilian males. And at first it surprised me, but then I realized that's a negative bias that I have, because they need leaders too. If they want to become test pilots, if they want to get to that next step, they need strong leaders, and who better to lead them than a strong female leader? And so I'm so fortunate to have that. It's really interesting when they come and they're so excited. They're like, these are all the things I looked at, what do I need to do next? And that's been really eye-opening for me, to be outside that normal professional circle and to still be able to provide something to them. So as a review, when we discuss the need to mentor women, we don't need to be blind. We can be blind to gender and career path or race or anything else. It's important. Is it important to see somebody like you in a leadership role? Yes. But as a mentor, we need to look further. We need to look at our values. We need to look at where we want to be. Mentorship is a personal relationship, and it takes work by both parties in order to be successful. And finally, follow your dreams. I don't know about you, but I know I didn't do it alone. The people behind me may not be able to follow theirs if it's not for me and the other mentors in their room. They might need a little bit of guidance. They might need somebody who's impactful. As we look to the future or difficult challenges that we find in the next decade, whether it's developing hypersonic weapons, AI, putting people on Mars, or just making the world a little bit of a better place, it's essential that we do it as a unified group. There's this idea that we have to compete for the best jobs in order to end up in the front office of the C-suite. But another challenge I have for you on top of the networking challenge that everyone has today is something that my brother, who I said earlier was my favorite mentor, left with me. I said initially when I was in Hawaii, I was kind of coming up to that level where it was time for us to compete in performance evaluations. And I wondered, I have all this information, I have these skill sets, but I'm competing with my peers. And, maybe selfishly, do I share this information with them? Do I help them and maybe make it harder for myself to compete? And my brother said, sure, we can all hide our information. We can go out on the mission and look way better than everybody else. But who does that really serve? It serves ourselves. Does it serve the Navy? If we take our strengths and we help others, then who actually gets better? The unit gets better, and the Navy gets better and stronger. And isn't that actually what we're supposed to be doing? I don't know how you'll answer those questions, but I want you to chase your wildest dreams and become the person you are meant to be. Maybe there's someone who can help you achieve that, and perhaps they're sitting in this room. Thank you. Yeah.
So we have two people with microphones on the floor. Where are you? If you could raise your hands. And the lieutenant would like to answer your question.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering, what made you choose Space Systems Engineering for your master's degree? What was your reasoning behind it, and what are you hoping to do with it moving forward?
So I guess this comes back to taking risk. My background's in mechanical engineering, and I picked that initially because it was sort of the I thought it was the foundation of most of the other types of engineering I could have chosen. For space systems, when I was a student test pilot school, we're exposed to a lot of different sort of speakers in industry, and I thought aerospace was really interesting, especially where the space industry is going. And so I was like, well, maybe that's something I want to specialize later in my career, but I don't know anything about it. So I chose space systems engineering because I wanted to learn more and see if I actually enjoyed the topic, and I loved it. It was Hopkins is a phenomenal university, especially with the APL affiliate. So I was able to do that, and then as far as where I plan on taking it, I don't know. Eventually, I'd like to be an astronaut, but anything to support that sort of humanities development into the next frontier would be. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
So I read a lot about intelligence versus grit and determination. So how do you think that played a role? Like, how do you think the two played a role in your career?
I'm so glad that you asked that. I'm reading Grit right now by Angela Duckworth, or I'm listening to it on Audible. And I think perseverance for me was absolutely huge. I went to the Naval Academy. I'm from a pretty small town in Texas, a pretty rural area, and I had a solid foundation going to the Naval Academy, but academically it was very difficult. So being resilient and knowing when I failed at things, which sometimes I did, that there had to be another way around it. That's why I think I'm standing here today. There are so many times in my career where I could have thrown my hands up and said, well, I'm just not smart enough to do it. And instead it was like, well, I may not be smart enough, but I can probably figure that out. So I'm not one of those people that I think is just naturally gifted, like in most things. But the resiliency, I think, is the biggest thing that paid off in getting me here. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Photo that you showed at the top of the event.
Yeah.
Take us back to that experience of that day in the flight mode. What were you thinking? Trying to get through those patterns.
It's really, so that exact day, I will say, so I guess do you want to hear more about the sort of like the resilience things that I talk to myself?
Right.
Okay. So I'll give you this one story, and I'll probably regret sharing it. But it's interesting the way that we talk to ourselves. And so flying's one of those things where you don't really have time to go internal, right? If you start going internal, you're probably going to snowball if you start evaluating your performance. And what I love about flying is you're purely in the task. Like, you're completely focused on what's going on, unless you start to go internal and then the flight starts going poorly. So I had this one flight, and it was one of these remediation flights to get ready. And the instructor was great. He was really calm, but it was like a windy day coming into land, and it was not going well. I cannot believe I'm telling the story. So it was not going well, and he's like, you need to relax. He's like, forget I'm back here. Sing a song in your head, sing it to me. I don't know. He's like, but you know how to do this. You just have to relax. And the song, I don't know where it came from, but the song was like that song. I think it's like, I get knocked down, but I get up again. And I am so sorry for singing. But that's really, like, I'm just like, and it's like playing in my head, and I'm like, I get knocked down, okay. And weirdly enough, I just, other than how embarrassed I am even now, ever repeating that story, like, and trying to sing into the mic, I'm so sorry. But that calmed me down and then got me back in the game, and I was able to focus on what I was doing. So that's a 2010 memory, which I hope that I will probably relive on the internet for the rest of my life. So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone look at, okay. So you mentioned not being afraid to make cold calls in pursuit of a mentor, right? So how do you approach the cold call, and like what are some of the things that you focus on when you're, because you don't want to waste anybody's time, right?
Right.
So what are some questions that you ask, or how do you typically format approaching a mentor?
So so you said, like, you don't want to waste anyone's time, and that's definitely like a fear that you go into it with, because you're like, I don't know how much time this person has. But people are surprisingly open to mentorship. There are a lot of individuals really do want to share their stories. So I'll usually start out with like a quick introduction. If I was able to use like a networking in or something I liked in their, like a networking in's like, hey, I know this person in common, not even more than a sentence about myself, but like what I'm trying to accomplish. Mentors, they kind of need some direction. You can't just like, it's hard for a mentor, and you'll find that in mentoring positions when someone comes to you like, I just need help. You're like, with what? So normally I'll just do an introduction like, hey, I either really like something in your bio because I'm trying to become an astronaut and you're an astronaut, and like here are some of the questions I have about your career. And I'll have like 5 or 6 questions, maybe not stuff that's specific to their biography or just things that I want to know to help develop like my understanding. And at the end, I'll usually close by thanking them for their time and just appreciating any input that they can provide. And that's usually what opens the door. Sometimes I never hear back. Sometimes I'll go months and then get like a full email back from someone. But there's very rare instances where I've reached out to someone or someone's reached out to me and there hasn't been communication back and forth. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, thanks. I can't believe I don't.
Good morning, Lieutenant.
Good morning.
Thank you for your service. Tony Stout from CSM. Teach leadership and management here. One of the things that I always like to make sure that my students understand is that mentoring is a symbiotic relationship. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about opportunities that you've had to strengthen and better those above you.
Okay, so to strengthen and better. So gratitude's pretty important. That level of feedback to say the information that you shared with me was useful, and that's tough. I think being respectful of their time. Yeah, I guess I don't have a good answer for that. I think I've just...
Well, it is a tough one, and I
Yeah.
can tell you from my history and being a mentor and a mentee, is that I tried to go into the mentor relationship
Right.
every day, not just providing something to the mentee, but also figuring out how can I learn something from that person. And I learn something different every day with every person I encounter. So for those mentees, I would encourage you to take that mindset, our mentors, take that mindset that it is a symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Take something away from it as well and strengthen yourself.
Absolutely. I've grown a lot. All I want to see for the people that I'm mentoring is that they achieve what they set out to do. And I think one thing I've kind of challenged, I've personally challenged, I've been challenged with as a mentor is sometimes you give people all the tools they need and you don't see them take, and maybe you have some advice that we can talk about after, you can share it with the audience, but sometimes I'll sit there and I'll work with somebody for a very long period of time, helping them get an application ready, and then they'll never turn it in. And it's hard for me, I don't take it personally, but it's really hard to see the way that sometimes it doesn't sit with me well. And I don't think that as a mentee you should feel that kind of pressure. it's just something as a new mentor I'm personally struggling with to say, okay, maybe that wasn't that person's application, but to sort of like let them have that space. So I'm as a mentor, I'm personally working through like some of that, and I think that's difficult, and you probably have really good insight on how to deal with situations like that. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, Captain. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoa, Captain must be in your future.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Lieutenant Marcus Matthews, NSWC Dahlgren Division. One, thank you very much for your service. I served as well as 23 years. Of my 23, I served in 20 naval aviation. And during a time when I did not see any females in Navy jet aircraft, I was part of the Air Wing staff down in Virginia Beach area. So during your presentation, you talked about some great mentors who got you up to this point and doing great in your 10-year career thus far. Did you come across any challenging leaders who may have given you the kind of message like, you don't belong here? And if you did, how did you handle that?
Oh man, that's a good one. So I'm gonna hit that on 2 points. When it talks to the numbers game, when I got to my first fleet squadron in Hawaii, where I always talk that was a really positive tour, there were 9 female pilots in my squadron. So it was really normal to be a woman, and like it just wasn't something that anybody thought was unusual. And what that allowed was it allowed for you to be your skill set rather than your gender. You weren't some kind of like token woman. You were like, okay, like this person's an instructor, this person's a mission commander, like you were your skill set, which was really nice. As far as the challenges I faced, I found the longer I stay in, the more I'm like, where are all the other women? It's just it's starting to get better. And we talked about this actually earlier. We mentioned this earlier that it's not just a Navy problem. I think it's also an industry problem. That there's still all these women coming through, but there's not as many coming through the middle. And again, that's not just a problem in the military. And that piece probably, if I were to guess, comes to that getting to the C-suite and the front office does take a level of mentorship. It takes someone looking at you and saying, hey, I think that you can make to that next level. So I was told that I didn't remind somebody of a department head with no other feedback, with no, these are the areas that you can improve. But it's just like, well, you just don't remind somebody of a leader. And one of my mentors who's at a senior level, she's an 06, was told the same thing. Like, you don't remind somebody of major command. So without any other feedback, without anything other than just that, it's really hard to take that information on board and grow. So probably I aggressively pursue positive or any type of feedback, positive and negative feedback, to try to combat some of the biases that are there. And if somebody doesn't have any feedback for you, but they're telling you you can't do something, I think to myself that that's an issue. So I think perseverance is really important. If I can't get through the front door, I'll just go through a window. So I try to find ways around it. And so that's really the only way that I've found to try to combat that. But I have faced it. I think everyone in this room, men and women, have faced moments like that where you're just like, I don't understand what's keeping me from getting there. And maybe it might be something else. And maybe the person who's doing it to you doesn't even realize that they're doing it, which is an issue too. But I think you guys are talking about biases today, so I'm really happy to see that on the schedule. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Recovering male senior executive in the Navy.
Congratulations.
And I am a leader, and I do want you to ask me for a job.
Okay, awesome.
Aside from that, what is it that you're going to tell me that's the most important message on this subject as a male senior executive in the Navy? What's my blind spot? What do I need to see? And what do you want to tell me?
The most important, wow, that's a good one. The most important message is that I'm going to give you two. I'm sorry, you can pick which ones you like better. We all have blind spots. So I know, like, when I found from my own mentorship situation that I have them, I think that everyone has them. So there's a sort of self-inspection piece to say, how did I get to these blind spots? Like, maybe there's situations that you had as like a leader or even coming up that that cause you to have them. I had one of my mentors, she shared with me that she scored women, when she did her biases, she actually scored women leaders lower, which is weird because she's a leader, and she's like, I obviously don't think that, but she realized that she was reflecting all the things that she's ever been told. So there's we have them, it's okay, we're all great people, there's just ways to mitigate them. And then the other one, so you can pick which one you like better, sir, is that sometimes there's more going on than just what the problem is with the person. And as leaders, I'm sure you've seen that. But sometimes you'll have someone whose performance is kind of falling off, or somebody who seems like there's something's just not right, and if you dig in, there might be a problem with the culture of the organization. Oh, I've got a third one now, sorry. You can pick which one you like. I've got a lot. I'm a very opinionated lieutenant. So at the higher echelons, this comes back to what I was just saying, at the higher echelons of leadership, sometimes I think we forget, like the people at the top forget what the people on the bottom are facing. So they're like, the culture of this organization is great because I can walk around and I can say I care about all these things, but it's been so long since you've been at the lowest level that you might not realize that the things that you are preaching is getting lost somewhere in the middle. That's one of the most important. I'm done. That's good. Sorry. Thank you, sir. If that's it, I'm not going to sing anymore. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Good luck today.